All right, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating legal puzzle, one that could honestly affect any of us. When does a temporary stay, say at a relative's house or even a hotel, become your residence in the eyes of the law? Now that might sound like a simple question, but the answer has some huge consequences for how and where people can access justice.
So let's make this real for a second. Imagine you're just on a short trip to another city. You're staying with family for a week or two. And while you're there, something happens and you need to file a lawsuit. Can you do it right there, from your temporary digs, or do you have to wait until you get all the way back home? Well, it turns out the entire answer hangs on the legal difference between just visiting and actually residing somewhere.
And to really get our heads around this, we've got to look at a real-world case that literally forced the courts to draw a line in the sand. It's the case of Buttada versus the state of Maharashtra. Now, it started as a domestic violence case in a small town, but it pretty quickly blew up into this nationwide legal puzzle about the meaning of home.
Okay, so let's just lay out the basic facts that nobody disputed. Arti and Harshad Buttada got married in a town called Akola back on July 11, 2008. After the wedding, they lived together in a city called Nasik. Simple enough. But then, in 2009, things got complicated. Arti filed a domestic violence case, but she didn't file it in Nasik, where they lived. She filed it in a completely different town called Akot. And that one decision is what kicked off this whole legal firestorm.
So this is where the fight really started. Arti's reasoning for filing in Alikot was that she was temporarily residing there with a relative, but her husband's family immediately pushed back. They said, no way, she's just visiting. Our home is in Nasik, so any lawsuit has to be filed there. And just like that, everything, the entire case, hinged on the definition of that one little word, resides. And this is where we get to the heart of the legal battle. You had two sides with two completely different takes on what it legally means to reside somewhere. The court was in a tough spot. It wasn't just about the facts anymore. It was about interpreting the very purpose of the law itself. The two arguments really couldn't have been more opposed. On one side, you have the husband's family arguing that a casual visit is absolutely not the same thing as a temporary residence. And they raised a really important point. If you blur that line, you open the door to legal harassment where someone could just file a lawsuit against you from literally anywhere. But on the other side, the wife's lawyer argued that, look, the Domestic Violence Act is a protective law. Its whole point is to help vulnerable people, so it has to be interpreted flexibly so they can actually get the justice it promises. You know, the petitioner's entire case really just boiled down to this one powerful idea. There is a distinction between temporary residence and casual visit. They were fighting for a clear, legal standard that would apply not just to them, but to everyone. So how in the world does a court solve a puzzle like this one? Well, they basically have to become legal detectives. In this case, the Bombay High Court had to go back, meticulously examine the exact wording of the law, and then dig through legal history for clues from a key case from the past. Okay, so at the very center of this whole thing is Section 27 of India's Domestic Violence Act. The law itself is actually pretty broad. It says a case can be filed where the person who has been wronged permanently or temporarily resides. And there it is. That's the phrase at the heart of the problem. Temporarily resides. What does that actually mean? That's what the court had to figure out.
Well, the judge, Justice A.P. Bengali, found the critical clue he was looking for, and he found it by going way back to a Supreme Court case from 1963, nearly 50 years earlier. The case was MST Jagirkar versus Jaswant Singh, and this old ruling would provide the perfect framework for his decision.
And that 1963 case gave the court exactly what it needed. It laid out 4 crystal-clear principles. First, residing somewhere means more than just, staying for a bit. Second, it requires a real, concrete intention to remain there. Third, and this is super important, it explicitly does not include a casual stay or a flying visit. And finally, the definition always has to be understood based on the purpose of the specific law you're dealing with. This was the roadmap the High Court was going to follow.
So, with the law in one hand and this key precedent in the other, we finally get to the High Court's ruling. Let's break down how Justice A.P. Bengali put all the pieces together and solved this puzzle. On June 13, 2011, the Bombay High Court delivered its judgment, and it was a decision that would carry some serious legal weight for years to come. The court's reasoning was really twofold, and it's brilliant. First, it established the principle. Temporary residence requires a genuine intention to stay. It's not just a casual visit.
That directly upholds that 1963 precedent. But second, it addressed the procedure. It said that a question this important, where a case can even be heard, can't be decided just on paper. Both sides have to get a fair shot to actually present evidence.
So what did this all mean in practice? Well, the High Court overturned the lower court's orders that had allowed the case to proceed in Advocate Court. But, and this is key, it didn't just throw the case out. Instead, it sent it right back to square one. It ordered the trial court to have a proper hearing with actual evidence to decide the residency question first. See, the ruling wasn't about who was right or wrong in the main dispute. It was about making sure the correct legal process was followed from the very beginning.
So why are we still talking about this one case from over a decade ago? Because its impact goes way beyond just the people involved. It continues to shape how justice is accessed and administered across the country.
One of the biggest things the court was trying to prevent here is something called forum shopping. It's a legal term for when someone strategically picks a court where they think they have a better chance of winning. A good way to think about it is like a sports team trying to handpick the referee they think will be on their side. The court needed to make sure the law couldn't be misused like that.
And this is how the court's ruling just masterfully strikes this delicate balance. On the one hand, by not making the rule impossibly strict, it protects victims who genuinely have to move or relocate. They can still file a case. But on the other hand, by requiring that intent to stay, it prevents the law from being weaponized to harass someone in some random, inconvenient court. It's a really smart solution.
You know, if there is one crucial takeaway from this whole explainer, it's this fundamental principle. The law is designed to be a shield, to protect the vulnerable, not a sword to be used for harassment. This entire ruling was about making sure that principle holds true in the real world. And that really leaves us with a final question, one that's just as relevant today as it was back then. As we create more and more laws designed to protect people, how do we make sure that those very laws, the ones with the best of intentions, don't become weapons themselves? That is the constant, delicate balance our legal system has to try and maintain.